Chapter 3. So did you tell her? Naina asked Jai. Tell her what? He quipped. Do not get cute with me, Jairam Nair, his little sister retorted. Hey, you have just landed. Can you cut out the interrogation and give your brother a hug? Sure, but right after you tell me what you said to Shamita, she insisted. Jai looked to his mother for some support, but she appeared as eager as Naina to know what had transpired between him and Shamita. Fine, he said. We didn't really talk much as she was busy unpacking, but we have promised to catch up soon, he finished. Neither his mother nor his sister spoke for about 10 seconds. Finally, Naina couldn't take it any longer. What? That's it? Well, what were you expecting? Jai asked her, irritated. God, nothing. Let it be. I can see you are as useless now as you were 12 years ago, Naina snapped. Fine, you go talk to her, he muttered back. He picked up their suitcases and deposited them in the trunk of his SUV. Don't think I won't tell her, Jai. As always, Naina had to have the last word. Geet's house was a mad circus. Shamita had last count of all the cousins and extended cousins that she was introduced to Neelu auntie. Had introduced her to a lot of Geet's male cousins whom she considered to be eligible bachelors. It was funny, really. Had it not been for her nervousness, she might have actually had a good time. But she couldn't. Shamita Bose was nervous, and her nervousness had nothing to do with all the eligible bachelors. She was nervous because of Jai Nair. One would think that after 12 years of not being in touch, she would have become immune to his presence. But no, Shamita was still affected by him. Even more now, in fact. Today she knew the carvings and urges of her body, but she had never thought that she would be so deeply affected by Jai's mere presence. He was standing across the hall talking to Karan and one of Geet's cousins. His sister Naina and their mother were right behind him talking to Geet's aunt from Bhatinda. Their eyes met. Jai smiled and Shamita melted. She could feel the crimson blush on her cheeks. How can you still do this to me, Jai? But the man in question seemed oblivious to the fact he was having on her. Flashing his dimples, he excused himself from the conversation he had been having with the two men and gently tapped on his mother's shoulder. He whispered something in her ear and smiling she turned to Naina. The Bhatinda auntie found an uncle from Noida to talk to, and Jai made his way to where Shamita was standing, his sister and mother in tow. Shamita! Naina was as vivacious as she had been when she was a little girl. She came over to Shamita and embraced her in a big hug, kissing her on both cheeks. Jai's mother Lalita auntie also hugged Shamita. Naina then proceeded to grill Shamita about life in Paris and about all the other cities where she had lived in the last decade. Oh my God, you have lived in Madrid. I'm so jealous. Naina's voice trailed away wistful. For how long you will be in India, Shamita? Lalita auntie asked. For just 3 weeks, auntie. I am going to Pune after all the functions here are over. I will spend a week at home, Shamita replied. Oh, that is too short a visit, Shamita, Lalita auntie admonished. You must extend your stay and spend some time with us. Naina and I will be in Mumbai for a while before we return to Bangalore, she added. Next time perhaps, auntie, Shamita smiled. Jai watched Shamita as she spoke to his mother and sister. She had still not spoken to him directly. He knew this trait of hers. She used to do this in school when she wasn't sure of the answer to a question the teacher asked her. She would simply stare at the walls and blab something. She looked absolutely beautiful dressed in a long peacock blue skirt with light brocade work, a lime green sequined top and minimal makeup. Her hair was forced into a knot on the top of her head, but a few tendrils had escaped and were now curled at the nape of her neck. The creamy skin there was just begging to be touched, but her lips, lush, soft and pink, Jai wanted nothing more than to plant a deep and passionate kiss on her luscious lips. He wanted to spread her hair across a pillow and have her breathing heavily under him while he kissed her to a frenzied pitch. Wait, what? Was he having lascivious thoughts about Mithi? He never had such thoughts about her. What the hell was going on here? She was forbidden territory, wasn't she? Jai was positive that Shamita had no idea how much she affected him, and it was this innocence of hers which proved to be a bigger turn on for him. In his mind, there was nothing sexier than a woman who didn't know the power she wielded over a man. And then Shamita did the most shocking thing he had ever seen her do. She looked at him and winked. Jai had to correct himself. There was nothing sexier than a woman who knew the power she wielded over a man. Shamita didn't know what it was about Jai, but just having him in the same room made all her problems and grievances melt away. She could hear herself laughing at the way Naina was teasing her old brother. She hadn't laughed like this in years. In a cream kurta pajama with his wicker moccasins, he looked every bit the best-selling writer. Everyone else had eyes on Karan the groom, but Shamita only looked at Jai. She was sure that there were a few girls whispering to each other about him. A couple of older women were also ogling him. In fact, Shamita was sure that if she hadn't known Jai from school, Neelu auntie would have introduced him to her as another eligible bachelor. Would she have laughed it off then, like how she had when she was asked to meet the other bachelors? Or would she have thought Jai to be different? Shamita's mind was running haywire with all these questions, and for the life of her, she didn't know how to answer even a single one of them. How could she have feelings for Jai when she had just met him? She was over him, she was. She had been in relationships, but had she been in love? She had never let anybody get close enough to ever fall in love. It had taken a great number of counseling sessions with Geet over the telephone and subsequently over Skype at ungodly hours to get Jai out of her system. During each conversation, Geet would invent a new profanity to throw at Jai, and Shamita, in her own way, would find out whatever little she could about Jai without being too obvious. She learned from Geet that after his masters, Jai had returned to India with 2 published short story collections in his kitty. Back in Mumbai for a short while, he lived in a small flat at Andheri. He then moved to Worli to a slightly more upscale flat. It was somewhere around this time that success finally found him, and he wrote 3 bestsellers in a short span of 2 years. He now lived on Carter Road and had also bought a small flat for his mother in Bangalore. So what if she knew so much about him? He was her friend after all. She was bound to know. She knew she couldn't deal with so much so soon. She had only just come back to Mumbai, and she was here for Geet only. She would be back in Paris soon, and life would be back to normal again. What about Jai? A little voice chimed in her head, but she shushed it because just then Geet called her to her side. Jai was called by Karan. They made their way together to where the couple was standing. Geet's lehenga choli was in a shade of gold and cream, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. The entire hall had been done up in hues of mellow orange, gold and cream, and standing below an archway made of white roses. Geet and Karan exchanged rings. Applause rang out across the hall. And as she watched Geet smiling from ear to ear, Shamita felt a small stab of envy. So what do you think? What will happen? Will Jai and Mithi ever exchange their emotions, their thoughts to each other? Let's see that if that ever happens in chapter 4. So here you go. The last of the guests who were staying in various hotels across the city finally left. Shamita really wanted to soak her feet in warm water. She had danced practically all evening, and due to Geet's outrageous choice in music, the DJ played everything from hip hop and house to Bollywood and Bhangra. But Shamita hadn't danced like this in ages. Back in Paris, whenever she went clubbing with Mia, they always ended up sitting in the corner of the bar with Mia flirting with the bartender and Shamita dawdling on the tissue paper. But there was something about Bollywood music and Bhangra that just pulled you to the dance floor. Even in Paris, the one time she and Mia had been to a disco on Bollywood night, they had ripped the dance floor to quote Mia. But now her friend was heavily pregnant and they very rarely went clubbing. In India, however, you can start a club even in your own house, as Geet always said. When Shamita had been dragged onto the dance floor by Naina for a while, she had been at a loss for what to do. She knew Jai was watching her. She could feel his eyes on her. She could feel his eyes on her. Finally, mustering up courage, she looked straight at him. In that instant, Jai gave her his most brilliant smile. He then set his glass down, shook hands with one of Geet's brothers, whom he had been talking to, and made his way to where she was standing. For Shamita, the room and its occupants had pretty much faded away. She had eyes only for him. As he walked towards her, she could feel her pulse rate increasing. Her breathing turned shallow, and she could feel the short hairs on the nape of her neck standing. She was losing her peripheral vision. Suddenly, she was a Yash Chopra heroine. And then the DJ played their song. It had been their favorite song while in school. They would listen to it on their Walkmans all day long, sometimes even during class, much to the ear of their teachers. Shamita didn't know whether Jai saw it as a sign, but it gave her the courage to meet him halfway. She placed her hands on her hips and began to do the step they had mastered when they were in school. It was something she thought she had erased from her memory, but Jai and their song, it all came back to her. They had watched the Shah Rukh Khan and Kajol starrer together right after their 9th grade final examination. It had been their favorite movie. Jai laughed when he saw her do their step. He matched her step for step. Soon the two of them were dancing their hearts out, and everybody else had stopped to watch them. Before they knew it, everybody was singing and clapping to the beat. When the song ended, applause rang through the hall. Shamita was sure she was as red as tomato. Beside her, she could see Jai trying to set his hair straight. Her peripheral vision had returned. When their eyes met, for the briefest of moments, a sense of contentment spread through her. But Shamita knew that she could never be content with the present status quo that she and Jai shared. She had always wanted more. In fact, that was why they had parted ways in the first place. And now, as she ascended the stairs that led to her bedroom, she couldn't help but wonder if she wasn't setting herself up for heartbreak again. She knew she couldn't go down that road again. Granted, she was much younger then and could have probably handled it better, but even today, when it came to Jairam Nair, all sense and reason seemed to desert her. And Jai hadn't even given her any signs. She didn't even know if he was seeing someone. She knew nothing of his personal life. She made a mental note to ask Geet. She made a mental note to cancel the earlier mental note. She couldn't risk falling for Jai again. In his hotel room, Jai refilled his third glass of chilled apple juice. A teetotaler, he very rarely indulged in late night introspection, but tonight was that kind of night. So with a glass of chilled juice in his hand, he sat down on the couch in his apartment's living room and pondered over the day's events. His reaction to Shamita earlier that evening still shocked him. He couldn't understand the sudden urge he had to kiss her senseless and leave her gasping for more. But strangely, he was the one being rendered catatonic in her presence. Nothing had prepared him for the assault on his senses the moment she had set foot into the hall earlier. Was he giving her that power, or was it something that he was allowing to happen to him? None of this made any sense. He was here for his best friend. Hell, he was his best man. And for the life of him, he couldn't figure out why he was stuck on a certain Bengali bombshell. He remembered how her peacock blue skirt had sparkled while they were dancing, and the orange and yellow lights of the hall had seemed to add a mischievous glint to her laughter. But Jai had been mesmerized by her eyes. She had always complained of her eyes being too big for her face. Yuck, I look like a tadpole, she had once said. A very pretty tadpole, he had offered, but only to get kicked in the shin of his remark. But tonight, his Mithi wasn't a pretty tadpole, she looked stunning. Nothing could have prepared him for the way his body had reacted when he had seen her as she entered the room. His entire world had tilted. In fact, his world had lost its axis and was teetering dangerously. And it was when Shamita had caught his eyes from across the room and winked that he lost track of his world. That's when he had decided that before the night would come to a close, he was going to dance with his oldest best friend. God damn it, he was going to have talked to Shamita for his sake, for his peace of mind. He put his glass down on the table next to his bed. He stood up and looked at his reflections in the French windows. Not bad, he thought. He could see the moon outside, a lone star twinkling beside it. No, he said to himself, the star wasn't alone. It had the moon. She stood there for him, and encouraged by that train of thought, Jai picked up his car keys from the bureau and walked out of his apartment. He was going to get back his moon. Shamita couldn't sleep. She was too tightly wound up. She tried reading a book on the newest artist in the subcontinent. She stared at the first sentence for more than 7 minutes. She threw the book aside and began to plait her hair. But the curls just couldn't be tamed, so she let them be. Finally, she got out of the bed. She thought she would check her email and see if there were updates from Mia. Since landing in India, she hadn't spoke to her friend, and now feeling a little guilty, there was one email from Mia asking her if she had reached safely and informing her that the baby was healthy and probably missing his aunt. Shamita had tears in her eyes as she read Mia's email. Her friend had taken her in when she had been at her lowest. She had been weak and insecure and terribly fragile, but Mia had supported her and been by her side as she had rebuilt her life. Shamita knew Mia was staying at Michelle's till the time she went back, so she didn't call or WhatsApp her. She replied to her email saying that she had reached safely and that she was missing her precious nephew too. She wondered if she would tell Mia what had transpired between her and Jai. But she thought it is best not to worry her friend in her present state. She ended the email saying that she would call soon. Just as soon she hit the send button, there was dull thud outside her window. Thinking it was a cat, she didn't pay much heed to it. But then she heard another kind of sound. It sounded like a stone hitting the window, again and again. Shamita didn't even need to think about who it could be. She knew. She ran to the window, opened it and looked out just as Jai was swinging his arm to throw another pebble. "Stop, Jai, you will wake up the whole house," she whispered as loudly as she could. "Mithi, come down," he shouted. "Shh, no, Jai, go away," she replied. "If you're not coming down, then I'll come up," he retorted and started for the main door. No, Jai, wait. "Are you coming down?" Shamita didn't answer. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence of the night. "Mithi, I'm going to ring the doorbell. You can field all the questions people will ask," he shouted again. And Shamita gave in, and just like she used to say 12 years ago, she said, "Jai, I'm coming down." She quickly pulled on a pair of blue jeans to wear with her white kurta and dug out a yellow pulkari scarf from her suitcase, stuffed her feet into jutis and ran down the stairs as quietly as she could. When she reached the main door, she fumbled a bit with all the bolts and latches. Finally, she opened the door, and there stood Jai, like he always did, hands in his pocket, head bent down and kicking a tiny pebble. She quickly closed the door behind her and asked him like she used to, "Where to, Jay?" He smiled, put his arm around her waist, and said, "Marine Drive." So, everyone, that is it with chapter 4. The next chapter is going to be sweet, romantic friendship moments between Jai and Mithi and how they catch up with everything after meeting after 12 years. So, it's going to be their talks, their moments across Marine Drive. So, stay tuned for the upcoming chapter 5. Keep enjoying and let me know in the comment section what do you feel about this novel. So stay tuned for the next chapter.